Hey everyone, it's Allie, and we have one more final build update for a build, and I need to put this in the simplest terms possible. Our build is good to go. Oh my god, we learned so much about the build last night, and we are so unbelievably happy. Ziggy released the part 2 of his video where he played plans for majority of Act 3, and they look really, really good. And most importantly, GG finally released an endgame video where they showed off a bunch of builds and how they would work, and they showed off a plant build, and most importantly, they showed off a new Keystone that is absolutely disgusting, and it basically solidifies that our build should be very strong. Let's go over all this news really quickly and get you excited for playing plans in literally a few hours after this video launches. Now, first off, let's go over the Ziggy footage. Ziggy showed off Thrashing Vines, finally. We got to see the tooltip for it. And from looking at all this footage, the TLDR is that the plant support does work with Thrashing Vines, which is kind of disgusting. And most importantly, that this skill absolutely rocks. What it does is it allows you to put down one sequence of vines where you'll summon 2 vines for whatever the cast time of it was for 8 seconds. So if I have no additional cast speed in my build at all, the base cast time of Thrashing Vines is a second. So every second, 2 vines come out and slam the ground. If I were to get a little bit of cast speed and go down to, let's say, half a second cast time on Thrashing Vines, that means I now get 2 vines every half a second for 8 seconds, effectively doubling the total amount of uses. The neat thing about this is that it's a limit, so we can run this over abundance, effectively doubling the damage of it as we can just have, well, 2 going at once. One also nice thing here is that this really synergizes very well with increased duration. And one of the things we were looking to do for the build is to stack as much reduced duration as possible for Entangle, which we'll get here in a second. And this conveniently just means that we could just have a weapon swap setup going, where on one tree, we pick up the reduced duration for Entangle, and on the other tree, we pick up Preservation to make Thrashing Vines better. Later on, our plan is to come over here and pick up Blood Magic as well, and to go and pick up the Scripio because it's kind of insane. And that just naturally puts us right next to another increased skill effect duration node and a reduced effect duration node, which again would synergize really well with all this. The point is that for bossing, it now looks like we're going to just put down 2 Thrashing Vines and then either spam Entangle while we wait for those Thrashing Vines to time out, or to use Bone Storm, as Bone Storm is likely going to do quite silly damage. We'll have to see exactly what happens there. There's even some consideration for maybe just not putting Thunderstorm on a cast and crit and putting Thrashing Vines on there, so then we can just spam nothing but Entangle the whole time, and then to just casually sometimes press Thunderstorm on bosses or maybe every pack, but let's see exactly how that goes. Now, the bigger piece of news here that we need to talk about is the new plant Keystone, which we literally knew nothing about until they randomly decided to drop it in the endgame showcase. We now have Wildsurge Incantation, which gives you 50% more plant damage. They have 50% less cost, which doesn't really matter to us, but I guess it's neat. And most importantly, 75% less duration. At first, you might be looking at that less duration, you might be thinking that's bad, but no. That's unbelievably powerful. For Entangle, the way this skill works is it does an upfront hit damage with a fissure as it branches out, and then it's going to lash vines onto enemies, which do their own damage. As we saw from the Ziggy video, at around level 9 or so, the Entangle hit damage itself actually doesn't scale that well, but the vines do about double the damage that the hit damage of the fissure does, meaning as you push further and further, more of your damage is going to be loaded into those vines rather than the hit damage of the fissure itself. If we look at the skill gem for Entangle, we generate a vine every 0.1 seconds, and let's just assume that's always overgrown because it likely will. We can attach 5 onto an enemy at any time, and they last for a second, meaning that after half a second, you'd have 5 attached, and then for the next half a second, nothing happens because the first 5 need to time out. Well, if we got 50% less duration, sure, the fissure would last 50% shorter, but we don't really care. We're spamming it anyways. But most importantly, the duration on the vines latching goes down to half a second. And then 0.1 seconds later, when the 6th vine would want to attach, the first one falls off, meaning that it gets to attach, so we do full damage at all times with that. This only gets better the more less duration you have, because if we push this even further, let's say we reduce it by 75%, then that means that the vines only last 0.25 seconds. So we could theoretically have 2 fissures latching vines onto one enemy at the same time. This only gets better and better and better and better, so we ideally would want to have the lowest possible duration on this, assuming we have enough cast speed to be able to keep up enough fissures to constantly latch enemies. The point is, with Wildsurge Incantation, I think we're going to be able to very easily have a setup where we're going to keep 3 fissures down at all times, which are constantly lashing one enemy, giving us some pretty disgusting damage. This also now makes things like Upheaval really powerful in the setup, so it'll be interesting to see how we're going to put this together. The point is, the plant build is looking amazing. In the endgame showcase, they also showed off a spell totem setup with plants by using Vols, which I guess is pretty explanatory, right? Vols has been the game for a while, and it does make sense as you can use it as a way to have your totems generate power charges, allowing you to constantly play it. And in the showcase, they were just playing Entangle spell totems, and it looked pretty decent. I don't really think we would do that. I think what we would do with this is we would just play Bone Storm totems, because pressing Entangle on our own really isn't that difficult to do, and you're better off having Bone Storm on there for higher single target damage, especially given that Wildsurge Incantation kind of kills Thrashing Vines for DPS, unless you put on a cast on crit. Otherwise, you'd be spending so much time constantly recasting it that it wouldn't really be worth it versus just spamming Entangle. And yeah, Bone Storm just makes the most sense on there. Anyways, the point is, from everything we saw, we're happy. Everything looks good. The Ziggy footage does look a little bit Papega, but that's also because he played with an absolutely garbage weapon. He was playing with an Act 1 weapon with no additional skill levels on it. And once he did get an actual weapon, even though his tree was super scuffed, he didn't even have this Keystone, and he was running Pin as a third support instead of an actual damage support. His gameplay was still looking phenomenal, and it's only going to get a lot better on a build that's specifically optimized for spell damage setup and not the showcase setup he was setting up for, all the different forms and everything to showcase all the skills. Kiddies, we likely are not going to have to touch the bone skills, and we're going to have a great time with plants. And I cannot wait to play this in a few hours after this video launches. And I hope that you join me on Twitch for all the theory crafting that's going to happen on day 1 and for all the build updates that are going to happen over the next week as we push this build into the end game. I hope you're excited for plants. I hope you're excited to water your garden as much as I am. And I'll see you all on Twitch in a few hours.